Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 7th and 8th. Silverline will be there, so you should make your plans to be there too. We'll see you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline Comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish, they're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang-up job. They're not only trusted by Silverline, but many, many independent comic book makers. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday nights as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Creating beyond calculation, beyond politics, and beyond the big two. Welcome, Silverliners, to Wednesday Wham! We've got a great show for you tonight. We've got a full house. I'm joined by the Empress of the Inks, Barbara Kaelberg, the Paragon of Pencils, Rob Davis. We've got both wizards of wordplay tonight. We've got Scott Wakefield and Rory Boyle. And we've got, believe it or not, and we have a non-regular that I'm glad is here tonight. We have John Martin, the Viking King, also known as Hawkman every now and then. King of the Hawkmen, excuse me. We have our fearless leader, head honcho and chief bottle washer, Mr. Roland Mann. Welcome, sir. Glad you're here. And last but not least, of course, our special guest, Steve Englehart, bona fide comic book legend. Welcome, Steve. Welcome. We're glad to have you tonight.
I see you guys have a title called Trumps.
Yes, we do indeed.
I don't know if you know this story or not, but after Joe Staten and I did Millennium in 1986, the follow-up was going to be called Trumps. It was called New Guardians in the end, but it was going to be called Trumps.
Wow.
And Jeanette Kahn said, nope, Donald Trump would be upset if you did this. He was only a big wheel in New York at that time. But
I see.
Wow.
Wow.
Big enough to get her to back off. So.
Well, Steve,
Bring him on. Bring him on.
Your reputation precedes you. I was fortunate enough to be able to work with you in the early 90s on a book called The Nightman. Roland was my editor at the time, and we had a fantastic time on that project. It was short-lived but fun while it lasted. But for those who may not know, I will throw out a few titles that you've worked on over the years. Some of the most signature story arcs in the 70s, and my personal favorites in the Avengers, Doctor Strange, Defenders, Batman, Justice League, just, small stuff, nothing huge.
Nothing.
We've got so much to get started on, but I want Roland to get us started here because I wouldn't even be here without Roland. He gave me my first big break in full color superhero comics way back in the early 90s, and I'd like to know how you and Roland got together to work on Nightman. I think that'd be a great place to start. Roland, how did that happen?
So I don't know. Do you remember it, Steve?
Well, I was going to say. I mean,
I know I do, but do you?
It was Chris Ulm and
Mason.
Tom Mason, and one other guy. I don't remember, but it was the guys I think who were higher than Roland, who first came and asked me to work at Malibu. Yeah. And then when I worked at Malibu, I got editors and it was Roland,
Yeah, it was
Chris. So to me, it was just we just got assigned to work together. I don't recall anything sexier than that.
It was Chris Ulm, because Chris Ulm and I were both obviously fans of your work, and we talked about it a lot. Now I was still wrapping up when the Ultraverse launched. I was still wrapping up the Protectors. So there was Protectors, Dinosaurs for Hire, X Mutants. There was a line of other titles that were still finishing. So I was still wrapping up those. So I didn't come onto Nightman and Strangers until I think around issue 4 of both issues, both titles, somewhere around in there. But now I kind of got involved in some of the earlier things, like the conferences and things like that, before I was actually an editor.
Okay.
Yeah.
The conferences were great. I mean,
yes. Yeah.
Steve, I wanted to also bring up the fact that one of my favorite aspects of your characters and your story arcs was the fact that you brought in mysticism and the supernatural. I mean, obviously, when you have a title like Doctor Strange, that's expected. But even in the other titles, you had this fascinating character called Mantis, and she had a mystical sense to her, even though she was a martial arts character. But even in Shang-Chi, you always brought this cool aspect of there was a spiritual aspect, an intangible mysticism that revolved around the characters. Now, I know that when I was reading comics in that time period, that was heavily in the zeitgeist. That was in the pop culture. Mysticism, supernatural, and horror comics were a lot more popular then, and the gothic feel of that tone was more prevalent. But tell me a little bit about, was that just something that comes naturally to you, or were you interested in, the supernatural and mysticism and that sort of thing?
Well, I imagine I was sort of headed in that direction because of comics, with, all the stuff that even before just comics in general, you're sort of stretching the bounds of reality. No, but it was when I started writing Doctor Strange in his own book. I had done him in the Defenders, where I had treated him mostly as like a superhero who does spells out of his palms rather than light rays or whatever. But when I started writing his own book, I thought, this guy's the sorcerer supreme of Western magic. I really ought to know something about that. I never had a problem doing research for characters. So I went down to a store in New York. It doesn't exist anymore, Weiser's, but it was the big occult store. And I just went in. I said, I know nothing, but give me some stuff to start with. Where would I start? And I found that I was interested in it as a thing in and of itself. So I've been interested in magic in the supernatural ever since Doctor Strange, but I wasn't particularly going in that direction beforehand. But that was a while ago now. So yes, I've used that, what I got out of that in many other places.
So when you would write the outbursts of Doctor Strange, obviously Stan had written, by the hoary hosts of Hoggoth and all that sort of thing. Did you have fun coming up with new ones? I
tended to use the old ones too. There was, it's like if you want to draw Doctor Strange, you have to look at Ditko. That's so if I'm going to write a character, I'm going to take what we know about him and use him. But because I was sort of expanding the magical world that he was in, I did come up with other spells and so forth as we went into unknown places. I liked him as a character. I get this out of the way. I like pretty much all the characters that I wrote. You sit by yourself in a room if you're a writer, and if you're not entertaining yourself day by day, you're in the wrong business. So, any character I had, I tried to find out what makes this guy somebody in particular. With Dr. Strange, that was easy.
Sure. A lot of people may not know this about Steve, but he started out actually as an aspiring artist, and actually you did some art and worked with one of my greatest influences, Neil Adams. Tell us a little bit about how you broke in and got involved with some of those guys over there.
Well, real quickly, when I was still in college, my college was a couple hours outside New York, and one day I just took off from classes and went to New York, and I went to Marvel and said, "Hi, I'm a fan." And they kind of looked at me and go, "Yeah, well, we're a small company and we don't have any, This was like 1966. So this was before fandom, before conventions.
Sure. You were the original fanboy.
So Marvel said, "Well, we love you, but we can't spare anybody to do anything." So then I went across town. I went to DC, and they also were like, "Yeah, well, I don't know. Do you want to talk to Julie Schwartz?" Like, sure. So,
sure.
Not easy these
Twist
days.
my arm.
So they sent me in, and Julie gave me a half hour of his time, and we talked. I'm sure I was just fanboying out on the whole thing. And I love to tell this story because it'll never happen to anybody else. But when we got done, Julie said, "Well, there's a whole bunch of original art on the shelves right behind you. You can have some if you want."
No way!
Whoa!
So I got Brave and Bold Justice League pages out of that.
Oh, how awesome!
And I still have them. They're not for sale. All that any art that I picked up along the way is just part of my fan journey. It's people have asked, but no, not for sale. But anyway, so I came out of talking to Julie, and I just had this epiphany. It's like, these guys are not demigods. They're just people doing this job. So I could do this job. So later on, after I got out of college and all that, I went to Neil, hunted him down at DC. He used to work late at DC on Friday nights. He liked their light box and projector and so forth. So I just went up to him and I said, at some point I'd really like to work with you. And he said, "Well, how about now?" And I said, "Oh, well, blah, blah, blah." But he was just the nicest guy. Neil was the nicest guy. By all accounts, by many accounts, wasn't always the nicest guy in later years, but he was just a wonderful guy and took me on, even though, he could see that I was pretty rudimentary as an artist, but he wanted to give me a way into the business. He insisted that I get a credit on a story in Vampirella that he, was doing the art on. But I helped on the art. But he insisted that his assistant get a credit so that I'd have a credit. So when I went out into the world, I mean, it was great. So, and also I'm sure I absorbed a lot of Neil's attitudes about comics, which were combative even then, you know. So, you know, some of my celebrated departures from companies are probably because of what I learned from Neil. But, you know, I mean, so then I was in the business. I had a credit, you know, I was doing art stuff. And I mean, to wrap this up, I mean, I eventually got the lowest editorial job at Marvel. Gary Friedrich had it, but he went to New York, or he went to Missouri, where he was from, for the summer, and asked me to fill in. And Marvel, I think it was 100 or 110 a week payment for this. But there was 72, and you know that would take you a reasonable distance. But you could also get as much freelance work as you could handle. And so they started, you know, I ended up writing a script that Gary didn't want to write, and they liked it, and I liked writing it. And so then they started giving me more stuff, and then they liked that. So then they gave me more stuff. And then all of a sudden I was a writer and had no time for art after that.
So you transitioned, I think, from that artist to writer, but it wasn't directly into superheroes, was it?
No, because Marvel still published romance books and Western books and monster books in those days. And so that's where you could serve your apprenticeship to, you know, all right, now write stuff for publication, but not superheroes yet, you know?
Not yet.
So that was kind of cool. And I even drew some of the romance stories. You know, I was still a hybrid at that point. Wrote through whatever. And eventually they said, okay, now you can have a superhero. So
that's cool. Yeah. Do you still write with the pseudonym Ann Spencer every now and then?
No. That was a one-off.
That brings up a question I'd like to ask.
Sure.
Go ahead. Go.
Can you tell me what was behind the pseudonyms John Harkness and Cliff Garnett?
I can tell you better about it. I will answer your question, but I mean, Ann Spencer, my sister's name was Ann, and she married a guy from Spencer, Indiana. So that's where when I was writing romance books, that's where that came from. John Harkness is just a name. When I was in high school, we had a really boring history teacher. I'm not sure what teacher he was. But we had to do a book report. And, you know, it speaks to my character, I suppose. But I decided I didn't want to write the book report. I wanted to make up a book report. So I wrote this book report about this imaginary book written by a guy named John Harkness.
Oh no!
And that became my pseudonym. And he bought off on it. The guy bought off on it. But I tried it a second time, and he was
not so much after that. Okay.
And then the Cliff Garnett thing. I got contacted by, I don't even remember what company it was, but one of the, you know, they were going to start, it was a paperback house, and they were going to start a series to kind of go against, it's not the Punisher, what's the guy, there was some guy who was big in paperbacks, the Destroyer, or somebody who, you know, did 200 books about fighting in Vietnam and whatever that was. They wanted to compete with that, so they got 5 different guys to write stories about these characters that they'd come up with, and the house name was Cliff Garnett. So that was me doing the Cliff Garnett one, doing one of the ones under Cliff Garnett.
There's 5 of you. There's 5
there
Cliff
were 5
Garnett. That is fascinating.
I only wrote one of them. That's old school, right? I mean, to get a house name and hire people to
ghostwriting,
yeah. And it seemed like a cool thing to take a shot at. I mean, the series didn't take off, and I don't know that I would have wanted to. I don't think I would have wanted to do this on a regular basis, but it was kind of cool to write one of those things.
Did you use John Harkness anymore?
Yeah, John Harkness was in comics whenever whenever there would be something that I did that I didn't, it started out if I thought I just really didn't get it this time, I really didn't do up to my standards, I would say it was by John Harkness.
Oh, you pawn it off. I see.
But later, I mean, when I was leaving Marvel, and Marvel was turning into a merchandising house rather than a comic book house, I used John Harkness for a while, and then I turned it into SFX Englehart, which stood for sound effects, because that's all I couldn't do any real stories anymore. I was just doing,
sound.
So, and it was interesting because I was really sort of like telling Marvel what I thought about all of this.
Yeah.
And they let me get away with it, I mean, so that was all right.
Well, there's something I wanted to ask you. This is a little known crossover story that a lot of people may not know about you. It's a behind the scenes crossover that you were involved in that revolved around a Halloween parade that was equally visited by creators from the different companies. Tell us a little bit about that. I think that story is so cool.
Well, Rutland, Vermont had a Halloween parade to keep the kids from wandering around in the dark in Vermont, I guess. And the guy who was in charge of it, Tom Fagan, was a big comic book fan. And so he kind of steered it toward Halloween costumes. And I think he probably wrote to the companies. I'm not real sure, but various people at the companies. The first year was Neil and Denny O'Neill, Al Weiss, I think Wrightson again. They all went up to the thing, and they came back and they said it was really a lot of fun. They really liked it. So the next year, us Johnny-come-latelys went, and I went up there. I had a car, so I drove Jerry Conway and Len Wein and Len's wife at the time, Glynis Wein, and we had a wonderful time. It was, it was fun. It was. Again, this was 72, maybe 71, even. I'm not real sure, but I remember coming. There was a big party at Tom Fagan's house for the visiting people and everybody else who was invited. And I was upstairs for whatever reason. I came downstairs and walked into this ballroom or open room, and everybody was in costume. This was before cosplay. People didn't wear costumes to comic book shows, if there even were any, which I guess Phil Suling started them in like 69 or something like that. But there still weren't very many shows, and you didn't see a room full of people all in costume. That just blew my mind. That I was like, whoa, So anyway, somewhere along that weekend, I said to Len and Jerry, well, we could do this thing. And I'm sure it's my idea, just because it's like weird. So I don't think Len or Jerry would have come up with it, although I wouldn't swear to it if they wanted to claim it. But the idea was, let's do this crossover. The three of us write books. Let's do this thing where they all go to this Rutland Halloween parade. And Jerry was writing Thor, and I was doing the Beast. I might have been doing other stuff. By then, I think I would have been doing other stuff in Marvel, but I was doing the Beast. And Len was doing the Justice League, which was a whole different company. But we all said, yeah, let's do that. And so those three stories, we couldn't ever announce it officially, but I mean, Steve and Len and Jerry and Glynis and my Mustang wander through all three of those stories. And if you put them in the right order, you can sort of see us get involved in one story and then walk out, and then walk into the next story and get involved in it and walk out, and walk into the next story and walk out again. And it, so
great.
It had
that's
cool.
That's fun.
That's awesome.
See, that's I love that kind. I was the new guy on the block. It wasn't like I'd been around for 30 years and had done this ever before. But we all got caricatured by Marie Severin at Marvel, and we all got caricatured by Dick Dillon over at DC, and that was cool to get to see all that stuff. But let's say comics were always fun for me. I was always looking for what would be I mean, you had to sell it. You had to, meet your deadlines. You had to do that kind of stuff. But I mean, if you could do that, then what could you do to make it special for the readers? Could make it fun for you, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, really, I look back on it now and I go, wow, really? I came up with that? I mean, it's just like, that's pretty weird for for a guy who's new to the business. But
so you were new to the business, and we're talking around the early 70s here, and you're just getting sort of into Doctor Strange and then the Defenders and then into Avengers. When you get a signature book like that, and obviously the run was so well received, but did you have a lot of editorial oversight, or did you feel like, I've made it, I can play, I can do what I want, as long as the book is selling, they're going to let me roll with it? How did that work?
Well, that was the specific instructions from Roy Thomas, who was the editor. I mean, again, I got to back up, but when Stan decided he needed assistants, he hired Roy and he hired Denny O'Neil, and he drilled them. They had to sound like him, because he said everything had sounded like him, and he didn't want to have suddenly new voices in the Marvel Universe. And so they got rigorously drilled about that. But when Roy took over, to his credit, he said, you guys can do whatever you want to do. He said, we've got more. Marvel was expanding. He said, I've got all these books. I've got no time to be like drilling the writers in addition to everything else. So his specific instructions were, if you can sell it, if you can make it sell and you can turn it in on time every month, then you can keep doing it. And if you can't do one or both of those, then we'll fire you and we'll get somebody else. That was the entire editorial oversight. So yes, I felt like I could do anything because I was meeting my deadlines and the books were selling. So I had no constraints in my brain about I can't do this, or it might get weird or editorial. And that proved to be true. I mean, Roy never said, don't do that or do it differently or whatever. When I came to him and said, I want to do the Avengers Defenders thing over the summer, where I was going to do both of those books and weave the story between them, he said, you realize if you're late on just one of them, the whole thing will topple over. And I said, I won't be late. And he said, okay. And that was, that's it. That's all there was. And I would just say along those lines, when Steve Gerber and I got together at Malibu later on, the original Malibu approach was very similar. It did ossify a bit over time, but Gerber and I were it was like the lobster or the frog in the boiling water or whatever. I mean, we'd both gone on from Marvel to do other stuff, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, wait a minute. This is the way that it was. This is how it was when we first started, which, we obviously loved. Malibu seemed to have figured it out.
Well, that's something that we discuss here in the podcast a lot, is that it seems like today there's a different approach where a lot of the creators feel there are taboo areas, there are areas that must not be discussed, there are areas that must be discussed. There's politics, there's all this sort of thing swirling about. And number one, what I noticed in those days reading comics, there was no, it went everywhere. Anything could happen. It was a wide open field. It was pure escapist fantasy. And that is precisely why it was so compelling to me, as it, because I was the target. I mean, I was a teenage kid, and, anything that was fantasy, sci-fi, monsters, superheroes, shoot 'em ups, beat 'em ups, whatever it was, martial arts, loved it. It was great. Did you at any time feel influenced by editorial or even by the culture around you to, I'd better include this or not include this? Or did you think, no, if I think it's cool, that's the filter.
Well, no, I was aware of social conventions and
Sure.
politics and all the stuff
Sure.
that was going on around. I mean, but comics, again, I started, it was still under the Comics Code, and it was still on newsstands. It wasn't a specialty item at a specialty shop. They was just sitting there on any street corner you could buy comics. And they were for everybody. I mean, and so you couldn't scare the children, but at the same time, you were trying to write stuff that college-age kids and above would find interesting, right? I mean, that was part of the thing. So I never, again, there was never any editorial thing. One thing that I regret now, and you know, people can take this the way they want to, but I got a letter one day from somebody who said, well, there's never been like a real heroic Christian character. Christians are always shown to be sort of wimpy guys who, you know. And I said, oh, well, that's not fair. Well, so I created Firestar. I don't remember. To do that. But then later I thought, you know, that's the whole right-wing ethos is like, oh, we're not being treated fairly. You know, you need to let us have equal space in the whole situation. As far as the comic book character goes, it didn't make any difference. As far as politics goes, it makes a huge difference. But so I was a little unhappy that I had done that, because I'm not sure that, you know, I'm not sure that it played out well politically.
Right.
You know,
right.
I'm a liberal. What can I tell you? But I mean, I can create that character. I can have my fun and do my work on that character. But but that was a case where I sort of thought, you know, I should do this as a, you know, responsible person, and then I'm not sure that I should have. But you know,
well,
I know there's a few questions. There's a few questions in the chat. When you get a chance to get to them.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I'll pop them up there for you if you want to.
Oh, please. Yes.
I collected everything. I collected everything before I became a professional. When I became a professional, everything was given to me for free. And then after I stopped doing comics, I was pretty much done with comics. So I'm not going after anything today. And part of it is, well, two things. One, if somebody comes up to me and goes, man, you really need to read this thing, I go down to the comic book store and it's sold out. Right? If it's that popular, it's not there by the time.
Can I borrow your copy?
Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, and I'll say one other thing that, you know, may apply to this and also might be interesting to you guys. When I went to the Doctor Strange premiere a couple months ago, I was sitting next to some guys who can remain nameless, but they're doing comics now. The guy that I'm about to mention said he was doing both commercial, I mean, you know, Marvel or DC stuff and also independent stuff. And at one point he said, but I feel like I got here too late. Everything's already been done. Which was that was a weird, you know, I've not heard that concept before. And so I throw that back at you guys. Have you ever, you know, felt like that or
That's why we have Silverline.
Yeah. We got so much to do. Are you kidding me? We don't have enough. We don't have enough days.
We've got
to get our
so
ideas
many
done.
stories, man.
Okay.
I feel like people are stuck in that mindset, and we're the ones trying to pull them out of the readers, pull them out of picking up the same character month after month after month, and saying, "Hey, what about this? It's not stuck to its past, the corporate idea of what this story or this character needs to follow, because we're creating something new." That's me, and I don't know if that's how Roland feels or but
well, I mean, if you guys feel like you're doing something that hasn't been done before, then good. You know, I mean, since I'm not in comics, I'm not in a position to have an actual opinion about that. I just thought that was.
I think you've contributed enough to have an opinion.
Yeah.
I just thought there's a guy. That's just an interesting thing for this guy to say to me. You know.
Yeah.
Well, that's defeat before it's even started.
Ryan asked, "What are your thoughts on the Doctor Strange movies?" And he also asked earlier, "What's your favorite comic book movies of the current era, if you have one?"
Well, I like basically all the Marvel movies. I mean, that's an honest opinion. They're fun.
Mm-hmm.
They're not exactly the way I would have done them, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, they're doing good work in their own situation. So I've got quibbles here or there. Some places where I do quibble, but the Doctor Strange stuff, I think Benedict Cumberbatch looks like Doctor Strange.
Oh yes,
you know,
he
really
does.
looks great. As Doctor
Yeah, he
Strange.
does. He does.
And everybody knows here that I think that Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man.
Yes. Well, and we concur. We concur.
I would say his American accent is a little more American than I might think I would be hearing from Doctor Strange. I would think
it's
more British.
but a little more cultured. I mean, just it's sort of a broad, middle of the road American accent he's got. And this guy was a New York doctor, so I kind of see. Plus, he went to Tibet for years and years. I don't see him being quite that just American. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I really like the movies. I thought the first one was really good. The second one, I thought the fan service in the middle, where we introduced the 5 other characters so that Wanda could kill them. It was cool that she killed them, but the movie kind of stopped for 20 minutes while we introduced all these guys. And Strange is still standing there in that, you know, talking to these guys, and things didn't move at that point. But I understand why they did it, you know. But but you know, could have done something there. And I really love the part where he goes through where he and America go through the different realities, and the one where he turns paint. Where they turned into paint. I'm going, what the hell is that? And then they referenced it later, right? That he thought it was weird too. But but whoever those guys were sitting in some, you know, studio in Southern California or Taiwan or wherever the hell they are. But whoever made that earned their money. That was fantastic.
That was amazing.
So
as the co-creator of Shang-Chi, you know, being a child of the 70s, there was a feel to that character. It was very much like the television series Kung Fu. And I have a 2-part question to this. Number one, were you guys instructed to create something similar to that series? Because I know Warner Brothers owned that series. Or was that just something that was cool to you that you wanted to create?
That's the second one. Starlin and I watched that TV show and really liked it.
Yeah, I did too.
We want to do, because I was writing Doctor Strange and I had immersed myself in Western magic, and the whole idea of doing Eastern philosophy worked for me because it was something new to explore. It was also not like anything else I was doing, so I wasn't, you know, like having to repeat myself or anything. And Starlin, I think, like both the philosophy and the art possibilities, right? But so we went to Marvel and said we want to do this book, and again, it was Roy, who was the editor, who said, I don't see any purpose to this book at all. There's no one cares about this stuff, and so. But we really wanted to do it, and so we negotiated with him, and he sort of grudgingly allowed us to do it so long as we put Fu Manchu in it, because to Roy, Fu Manchu was a major character, and this was a Chinese guy, so here's a major Chinese character. You know, Roy's into the pulp, he's into the 40s.
Yeah, sure.
Pulp stuff.
Sure.
And also, Shang-Chi had to be half white. On the TV show, David Carradine had to be half white because ABC said you can't do a story about an Asian person. Got to have some connection to white people. And Marvel had the same philosophy. And I can't tell you if it was a correct philosophy. I do know that there were parts of the South where Luke Cage was not carried. So, it's like,
I never
make
knew
of that what you will. But we had to put in.
I bought it. I never knew that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I bought it in Mississippi.
Well, it was parts of the South, from what I was told. But in any event, when we agreed to do that, Roy agreed to let us do this book. So we did this book, and they put it in the most obscure place possible. I mean, it was in issue 16 of Special Marvel Edition, which had been a bad reprint book. I mean, it was like, but right after that, Kung Fu as a philosophy, as a concept, just exploded. And it's not because of us. We weren't out there long enough to have been the effect. We just were kind of the canary in the coal mine. I mean, we thought this sounds cool. And then it turned out to be extremely cool. But the problem was that Marvel then turned right around and they created Iron Fist. And they said, we're gonna make this bi-monthly book monthly, and we're gonna add a black and white magazine, and we're gonna do annuals, and we're gonna do specials. And I had envisioned a bi-monthly book where I could go through philosophy. And so, after 3 issues, Starlin bailed, and after 5 issues and 2 issues of the black and white, I bailed. And then it was kind of in limbo for a year until Doug Mensch and Paul Gleason figured out what they wanted to do with it. And then it became this really wonderful series under those guys. I mean, a different series, but a real, that run was fabulous. Somebody says it had Sergeant Fury reprints. So
yeah, Sergeant Fury reprints. So it wasn't all bad. No, it wasn't. All bad.
Hyper is a Sergeant Fury fan, so
yeah.
Well, anyway, so and the interesting thing there is, at the time, it meant nothing to me, really, putting Fu Manchu in that book, making him half white. But of course, now the star of the movies won't sign any of those books because they're racist. It's like, well, and I have loved the fact that many articles which came out at the time of that movie said, yeah, Master of Kung Fu, created by Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin. Yeah, it was racist.
What?
What? Oh, wonderful.
What?
Something but a shark and jumping.
So
that's just ridiculous.
Well, both of those, but so both of those statements are true, I guess, but they're not connected in real life. Anyway.
Yeah, well, it was. How did you think the movie turned out? Because it had a different feel to me.
It did. No, I liked the movie, except for the ending. I'm sure they're kind of at the point where they want to position everybody. But I, it's like, okay, you were sitting around in San Francisco parking cars, and then you got swept into this international thing where you're fighting dragons in an alternate dimension and all this kind of stuff. And when it's all over, you didn't have any response to that. You just went back to the bar and amused your friends. It's like, what, didn't that change your life somehow? So I thought, and I think that was that. And the whole thing with Wong showing up and saying, you must come, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I mean, that seemed like maybe they kind of tacked all that stuff onto the end. But I don't think it was a good decision to, I would have this guy have gone through something, to have shown that he went through something. But it was a fun evening at the movies.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Sure. One of the more appealing components of the Shang-Chi book, as you guys originally envisioned it and created it, was that we learned about philosophy and tradition of the fighting style, and also some of the Chinese history and mysticism as we go through the story, just like the TV series. And that's one thing that was really appealing to me about it. And I thought maybe they went too cosmic for my taste, a little too powerful, where I think something like Kung Fu might have worked better, more grounded. But again, I come from that era of watching that original TV series. So to me, that type of hero was a more grounded, learning about life as he solves problems.
Right. Well, we didn't want to just, copy the TV show.
Of course
we
not.
wanted to take off, in some directions that were suggested to us by the TV show. I mean, we've never been shy about saying we watched the TV show and came up with this idea, but we didn't want to just do the same thing.
Right. It turned out good, though. I mean, it was powerful. I'm glad the character's doing well. There's another character a lot of people may not know about is the Mantis character. What did you think about their treatment of Mantis?
Well, that's my biggest. I mean, you're hitting on all the things where I've got a bone to pick. But
I love it. I love it.
Again, not to the extent that I don't like going to these movies or think that they're not doing a good job. But the only thing in common between that Mantis and my Mantis is that they're both female. Every other distinguishing characteristic is completely different. And I'm like, On the other hand, I like Palm Clementieff as that Mantis. I like those movies. I like James Gunn's movies, So I had a good time at the movies, but I just thought, that was a character that I worked a long time on, was involved with for a long time, and having it changed, I
understand.
I'm smart enough to know, I've paid enough attention. The last thing anybody making a movie wants is for the original writer to come up and go, well, I would have done it differently. It's like, because they have their own, they have their own dynamics. They have their own problems. They have to do whatever they have to do. But I did ask James Gunn why he, changed the character. And he said, well, I needed a character like that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And I do get royalties. I get royalties for her, even though she's not my character anymore. So,
well, there you go.
I mean, there are benefits to the whole thing. Sure. But as a creator, I would have liked to have seen, the actual Mantis. But
well, there's been some content written about Mantis that possibly she has reemerged in other stories as other characters, maybe Lorelei, maybe some of the other characters that have similar backgrounds or mysterious origins or relationships to extraterrestrials, etc. Do you want to expand on that archetype that you carried through?
Well, that was me being playful, whatever. Again, I did this whole thing with Mantis for a year and a half, and then went on, wrote the Avengers for another year and a half, whatever, and then I left Marvel and got hired to go over to DC and do the Justice League and Batman. And I went to the San Diego Comic Convention that summer, and somebody came up to me and he said, does that mean there'll never be any more Mantis? And that made me think, why not? So
sure.
So I put Mantis in the Justice League, but I had to call her by a different name. Mm-hmm. And she's very playful and arch about saying the stuff that will let you know that it's her, but she can't say it, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, well, hell, I'll put Mantis in every book I ever do.
That's awesome. I love it.
So when I did Scorpio Rose for Eclipse, I put her in there and I called her Lorelei. But then, it turned out that sticking Mantis into every book I ever did after that is it becomes a little more difficult each time to kind of explain what the heck. So, I mean, that's where I stopped on that road. But I thought it was fun to put Mantis in the Justice League.
As long as you're having fun, then that's a success.
That's what matters.
Well, no, you guys have to have fun too, as the readers. I mean, if the readers are going, this guy's just tripping out, and it's not a thing, that's not what I'm shooting for, at least,
I want to open the floor up, Scott and Rory, as writers. I'm sure you guys have some writer-driven questions for our guests tonight. So fire away, my friends.
Rory?
Oh, yeah. So, as a fellow writer, who would you say is the most intolerable to work with? Artists, inkers, pencilers, editors.
Well, Steve loves his editors.
Yeah.
You're in a safe place.
I've had tough people in all of those things. I mean, as a writer, you want the artist to understand what it is you're trying to do. Well, you want everybody involved in the process to understand what you're trying to do. But I have worked with artists. I mean, when I was doing Luke Cage, as I'm still very low on the totem pole, I would come up with a story every month for Luke Cage, and I would send that to George Tuska, who was drawing it. And George, who was extremely old school, would go, "Yeah, I'm not feeling it." And I'd get back pages of a story that I didn't recognize.
All right.
Right?
Wow.
And
I'm not vibing today.
I was way down on the totem pole. I couldn't go to Roy and say, "You have to fire George Tuska because he's not drawing my stuff." So I learned that you can make anything make sense. I could take stuff. I kept having things that Luke Cage would never do, and I would have to think of a reason why he would do that, you know, and have it sound legit. And I've often said that it was good training as a writer to know, like, you got to get there somehow, and how's that going to work? But it was not fun, you know, at the time. And I was doing other books at that time with Luke Cage. I was doing the Hulk and the Avengers and the Defenders. They weren't giving me any trouble, but you know. So an artist who sort of deliberately doesn't do what you ask him to do it's not easy to get past that. I mean, an editor who says, "Oh, you have to stick this thing in or take this thing out," or something like that, it's usually the most important thing.
So all those original drafts, would you keep all those original drafts?
No, I didn't. No. But at least it's like, okay, you've just taken the story and you've done this to it, as opposed to like the story makes no sense in the first place, right? So that would be my answer.
Artistic types.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. We love you too.
Yeah. Because we're super easy to work with. I mean, as writers.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, I would also humanities. Another one along that line is when I did Millennium for DC, and had this idea that every book in the line should all be tied together. I made that as easy as possible on people. I just said, just if you could just do this somewhere in your story, we can make that. And everybody, it's like, sure, okay, fine, I'll give it a shot. Except for one guy, John Byrne, who said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to do something else. And it's like, wow. Yeah, well, Byrne's fairly well known for that sort of thing.
Right.
So that, that stuff happens. But usually.
When you were first getting started and the editors, as they want to do, would, just like the artist, like cut up what you had in mind and change it. Was that difficult? Was that, because I've heard multiple authors say you send it off to the editor and it's like not the story you came up with. How do you get over that? Because usually when you write something, you put a piece of yourself into it. There's some kind of attachment.
Sure.
So especially if they get rid of that little piece, it feels like it's not yours anymore. Is it just that getting rid of that emotional attachment? That this is just a business. This is just.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there. I mean, there is an emotional attachment, and it is a business, and I get that too. Yeah, I don't know that I have. I think that's all. I mean, it's like you do this long enough. I mean, it's like you better figure out that it's a business. But you still, I mean, you're doing it because you have some interest in it, because you have
you got some kind of passion for it.
What you're trying to get,
Yeah, and you want something out of it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Rory. So, Steve, my question is for anybody just getting started. I always like to ask this question.
Not us.
Right.
We're well seasoned. Yeah,
we're sure. Yeah.
I see the white hair. Yeah.
if you could go back and either tell yourself some sort of pearl of wisdom, or what would you say to either writers or artists? Most important, it doesn't need to be one thing. I'm just saying, what's some wisdom you would impart to someone getting into the industry and trying to succeed?
Well, I mean, the industry is very different today. I don't know what the culture is like at Silverline, and I don't really know what it's like at Marvel, but I hear things about Marvel and DC. But I would hope that you would be getting into this because it's something you want to do. You know, it's not like you're just doing it to pay the rent, or you really wish you were writing novels, but, you know, you got to take this gig to get by. You know, I mean, I would hope that you like comics and that you want to do comics. And then I would hope that you would be given the chance to do what it is that you want to do. I mean, again, I tell people I'm really lucky because of what I said before. I mean, I walked in the door and they said, you can here, have Captain America. Now do anything you want to do with it. Right?
Man. Wow.
I mean, wow. That was the deal.
So we found the Holy Grail. Do you want it?
You know, not everybody gets complete creative freedom, and we had it for a while, and so I never had to say, "Gee, is this too much? Should I stop here?" You know, it was just like I could let whatever my imagination was doing run its course, and I also say, I was very lucky to have Sal Buscema, a fellow Floridian, as my artist on a number of those books, because Sal could draw anything. You know, it's like I never had to worry: can this guy draw horses? Can he do hands? You know, whatever. It's like Sal could draw anything. So I was in this position where they said, "Do whatever you want." I did whatever I wanted. Sal drew it. You know, it's like everything just flowed really nicely. That's the ultimate. And so I would hope, I hope Roland's listening to this, that everybody gets complete creative freedom. And you know, I'm being a little facetious, but I mean, if you get into it, I hope you're able to like express yourself, you know, and it's possible you can express yourself and the readers could go, "We don't want to hear that." And then, you know, then you get fired, or, you know, whatever the deal is. But you know, I mean, from the same people who said, "Gee, everything's already been done," comes the idea of, I mean, I saw a lot of this in the 90s, I thought, where people go, "Man, I really liked that thing in comics when I was a kid. I'm going to recreate that." Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm not going to create something. I'm not going to take off in a new direction. I'm just going to like hit that same pleasure center that I had before. None of that stuff interests me. You know, I mean, I want to see people doing new stuff. And so, you know, I would just say, don't be trying to fit it into somebody else's bailiwick. But I mean, that's assuming you can get away with that. If you're at a company where they want you to, everybody has to sound the same, you know, or whatever the deal is, then that's
Roland runs a tight ship here. He does not allow. Boy,
look at yeah, everything has to run right past. No, Fruitbat says there needs to be some editorial input, not huge, but just enough. And yeah, we humor Roland. We like listen to Roland a little.
Thank you, Roland.
Okay, I'm still gonna just do it.
No, it's at the same at the proofreading level too. Like anything you're gonna write, if it's worth someone else, if someone else is gonna see it, someone else has to see it first. It's in the editing level too, because it's all up here.
Yeah.
And then once it's out there, well, it makes sense to me. I wrote this. Of course. Why don't you understand what I wrote? And so yes, an editor somebody else needs to see it and say, this make what? How did
this may make sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to me.
It all makes sense up here.
Right.
Agent Cub says, how does it feel to be the one to introduce the comic industry to Todd McFarlane?
That was just a weird, you know, I was doing the book for Epic Marvel's thing, and I needed artists, and this guy showed me his samples, and I liked his samples, you know. I mean, so yeah, I hired him, I would also say I didn't hire, but I was just sort of handed a young guy named George Perez. I was handed a young guy named Paul Galassi. I was handed a young guy named Dean Zachary, right? I mean, it just, a lot of that stuff was
Brent.
You know, you hope that you get to work with guys who are following that path I just mentioned about wanting to express themselves and doing stuff. And you know, Todd's stuff was pretty weak, whatever, when he started, but it was good enough. And then, you know, he became Todd McFarlane, but you never really know if people are going to do that. You just, you know,
well,
if you like them and you can give them a job, then you give them a job.
Well, you know, you open the door to these people and look what happened. I mean, it's
well, that's what happened to me, right? I mean, Neil let me in the door, and then it turned out that I did whatever I did. You know, I mean, it's. So I'm all in favor of
that. Can I real quick?
Thanks,
my question is about
that Dean Zachary guy is good. Still need a Sergeant Rock from him. We can work on that, Hyper Potato.
So Steve, you got your foot in the door, and I ask all these professionalism questions because I feel like, I've been kind of like, it's frustrating to watch people not do the right thing for their career, and they kind of like throw it all away. You got your foot in the door, but that's like, I don't want to say that's the easy step, but that's like the first step, and then after that. That's the important stuff. That's where you really have to shine. So like,
what did you know versus the what you know?
No, I'm saying it's okay. Someone gave you the chance, right? Someone took a chance on you,
right?
What do you? So and then you saw you had that opportunity, and you kind of you didn't quite take chances, but you said, okay, I'm going to give you the chance to draw. Once you had your, once you were settled, once you were a name, once you had all those titles under your belt, right? So what do you say to somebody who's been given that opportunity?
You just have to do it. I mean, I mean, as simple as that is, I happen to have a feel for comic books. I mean, it seems like I was able to write a bunch of comic books that people thought these are okay.
The quarterback can hand you the ball. It's up to the running back.
Barb, Barb with the sports analogy again.
I got into comics, so I didn't have to listen to those.
It's up to you to run it past the goalpost.
You've been let into the room with all the toys.
Yeah.
Now you have to figure out how to assemble those toys into something that you want to play with.
Right. Well, I would say. I did comics because I loved comics, and there was never a hint that there would be movies made out of them.
Yeah.
And then now, 50 years later, they're making movies out of them, and I'm getting royalties and all that good stuff. And I say to people, I'm just standing there.
Not a bad place to stand.
I didn't scheme and plot to get Marvel movie money later on. It's just like, I'm standing there, and all of a sudden, the world says, "Here, have some royalties. Have your name on the screen, all this kind of stuff." And what I honestly say is, I'm just standing here, and then I have to usually sometimes add, but I did the work.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's kind of the deal.
It is.
It's like
there it is.
I did the work that now they want to adapt. Right. So I did do that. But at the same time, I'm just a guy, I mean, I'm not a demigod. I didn't, just a guy who was in the right place at the right time, who got to do stuff. And then, 50 years later, something weird happened. So you do have to do the work. I mean, you have to write comics that people really want to read. You have to draw comics that people really want to see. If you do that, if that's within your skill set, then you should be fine. And it, as you guys know, I mean, it builds, right? I mean, you do something and then you get another shot. And then if you do that one okay, then you get another shot. So it's a simple. I mean, what did Woody Allen say? 90% of everything is showing up. Something. Like that, right?
Sure.
That's it. I mean, you want to do comics, then do some good comics, and then you'll be happy. Everybody else will be happy. You know. Maybe they'll be making Silverline movies in 50 years.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yes.
Yes.
50 years.
Yes. I probably won't be here then. But okay.
I have a question for Steve.
Yeah.
Is there a dream project or story that you never got to tell?
Not really. No. By being a comic book writer, I tended to work on a monthly schedule, and I would sometimes often work out some sort of overarching plot for something, but usually I like to let the characters develop themselves and take me down roads that they want to go on and all that kind of stuff. And so I couldn't say, oh, next month I'll definitely be doing this, because when I write this story, it might go in a different direction. So I always left myself the flexibility to do that. At the same time, I rarely thought much beyond, and even though, you can look, and I've got epics that ran for months and all this kind of stuff. So I had some sort of overall idea, but doing it month by month was how it got done.
But your own characters, maybe?
I'm writing very strange. I'm still writing stuff, but not for publication per se. I mean, if somebody wants to publish it, Roland, that's fine. But
let's talk.
I did. I wanted to do a story when COVID hit, and I had much time on my hands, like a lot of other people. I'd had this idea. I wanted to do a story. I wanted to do a story about a town. You've got like 20 ongoing characters in this town, small town in Northern California, and all these different people from all these different walks of life, all having different life stories. And then one day something weird happens, and two of them become a superhero and a superheroine, but I don't tell you which ones, right? And so we're doing adventures of these superheroes, but meanwhile, these 20 people are still living their normal daily lives, except two of them have a secret that you don't know which one. And I said, I want to do that. And so I had a lot of time, and I did it. And it ended up being, in order to have ongoing stories, because everybody's got a story, not just the superheroes. The other people have, there's Private Eye, and there's love stories, and there's all this different stuff going on. And they all had to have their own individual stories. And, so it ended up being 7 60-page graphic albums. It takes place over the course of a week, and it's 7. And it was a writing, can I do this? Can I make this work? All these different storylines, all at the same time, all within a comic book format of a beginning, a middle, and end, blah, 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 blah. Can I do that? And I did it. And it wasn't until I got done with it that I said, nobody's ever going to draw this. 420 pages with multiple characters, right? There's nobody, even George Perez at his most manic would not want to draw that. So it's this really cool story that I wrote, but it'll never appear. So then I followed that up. I wrote a story about a guy on the moon in later 21st century, when people do go to the moon, but he's like a miner up there, but he gets caught up in this kind of spy story on the moon. So you got cool visuals, you got, a thing. And that one is actually, from what I have an agent. I've had an agent for a long time for books and whatever else. And now, since I'm not connected to any comic book company and haven't been for 15 years, he's shopping it around. And
nice.
It's at another company at this point, and we'll see. But again, it's like, if nobody ever buys it, I wrote what I wanted to write. And I am thankfully in a position where every once in a while Mr. Disney gives me some money. So I am thankfully in a position where I don't have to sell this thing or die.
Right.
Right.
That's a nice place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Very nice.
You know,
Yeah.
and again, I'm just standing here. I didn't do anything to you know.
I'm retired from
well-
the Muggle world. I do this for more or less fun.
You've done quite a bit.
You built the foundation.
That's right.
The house just appreciated in value.
Absolutely.
I heard a story about Merv Griffin getting a check for royalties for the Jeopardy do tune for ringtones, and he called up his agent. He said, "What the hell's a ringtone?" He's getting a check for like $100,000. He has no idea. What for?
That's awesome.
Oh,
That's
okay.
I'm not saying no. Just what?
Yeah. James Davis says, is there a character or group you created for another company that you wish you could purchase the rights for and then self-publish?
Gee,
That
Roland,
sounds like
what do you think that could be?
Really, that sounds like a really baited question, doesn't it?
It does.
I would love to see the Ultraverse come back. I would love to write Strangers and Nightmares. And I honestly don't think it's ever going to happen.
How much would it cost?
Not for a while, anyway.
How much would it cost?
It's Marvel. Marvel owns it. Disney owns it now.
Right. And the only hope I have is that one day Disney looks in the drawer and goes, "We own all these guys. Why aren't we doing anything for them?" You know.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, some of this you guys may know, some of you may not. But 3 different times, Marvel. Well, let me put it differently. Tom Brevoort came to me in 2001 and said, "We're going to bring the Malibu characters into the Marvel universe. I want you to write this book," right? And I worked up a plot line. I took all the cool Malibu characters, you know, put them all together. I mean, it was the flip side of what Dean and I were doing in the Nightman thing. I thought, I mean, Nightman split into 2 characters, and I really wanted to do a Malibu Nightman and a Marvel Nightman.
Yeah.
Where they would, at that point they split, they would start to go off in different directions, and they would soon be 2 different guys, except they're the same guy at the start. And that didn't happen. But that was going to happen. And then, I mean, I worked up a complete précis how it was going to work. They wanted to know what are the first 12 issues, which I really hate, because I just explained I don't like to think. I don't want to get to issue 12 and just be checking the boxes. Oh, yeah, I said I was going to do this. But I did all that, and we got that far, and then they said, nope, we're not going to do that. And then there was another time where an assistant editor came to me and said, I'm trying to get the Malibu characters to come back, and I'm going to see if I can get, you know, I'm going to work in the system here and you know, just let you know. And 3 weeks later, I got an email from him, and he said, they told me it was worth my job if I pursued this. So Marvel really decided that those characters will never appear. And I believe it's because of the contracts, which is that the writer and artist get a percentage of the money from the books, right?
That's probably right.
And it's been explained to me.
That's probably right.
You know, if they said, okay, we'll do Nightman and Steve and Dean are going to get some money, the guy writing the X-Men would show up the next day and go, I want the same deal, right? And then they'd have to give it to everybody. So the story that you always hear is, oh, there's something in the contract where we can't do this. But I'm sure that it's because of the individual contracts and the percentages that would be paid out. So again, Marvel was adamant. Marvel was, I mean, this guy, he was serious. He said, they told me that I would get fired if I tried to pursue this thing. Marvel was adamant that they're never going to go there. Maybe Disney will. But to answer the question, I would love to see, you know, the Ultraverse back in business.
Yeah.
There were some great books in the Ultraverse.
With you there. Oh, yeah.
There
Yep.
were. Yeah.
I was Dean's inker for Nightman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The whole time.
Yeah, I was getting talks to do. What was the Iron Man like character? Was that
Prototype?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was talking to me about doing him, and then things fell apart, unfortunately, because I think that would have been a lot of fun. Yeah, that was an interesting book. Yeah,
it was. That was fun. I got to do a cover for that, Rob. That was a good. And you know who inked me on that cover was Terry Austin.
Oh
boy,
my
I was
God!
A fanboy of Terry Austin too.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah,
I had the unique opportunity for that, but also to work with Dick Giordano and Sal Buscema also. So, yeah, it was a great time. The Ultraverse period was
the
just
fanboy inside you was going.
I know, yeah,
right, right, yeah,
absolutely right.
Well, I always said, I mean, this is my understanding, but I mean, when Marvel went bankrupt, they took everybody down with them, and Malibu was the last one to run out of money.
Yeah.
But they did run out of money, and then Marvel really liked their coloring department.
Yeah, the
whole
Undertow
Photoshop
took me
thing.
out.
That was pretty cool. So they bought them for the coloring department and stuck all the characters in the book.
And then all the coloring department guys left.
We got one, a couple.
Yeah,
we got
They all jumped the ship.
So Steve, I don't know if you haven't been caught up on that, but the coloring department had nothing to do with the purchase, right?
Okay, that's what I understood. But tell me,
that was the story going around. Yeah,
that's and it persists still to this day. You can Google it and find it. That's
I
what
just
the reason
said
is. But Marvel actually did not like the coloring department at all. They couldn't stand it. They didn't. The editorial certainly didn't like it. They didn't want to use it. They almost had to be pressed to use it because of schedules. The reality is, right? So it was, and this, I don't know if it'll make you mad or happy. I don't know, but it's simply corporate maneuvering. Because DC had been doing, they'd been doing due diligence. I mean, they've been in the offices studying the books, going through the records, seeing is this a business that we want to buy? Can we buy this? And they've been doing it for months, right? Well, at the time, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but at the time, Marvel was about 45% of the market share. DC was somewhere around 30, 35, something like that.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And Malibu was a solid third, depending on what Dark Horse published that month, right?
Right.
If Dark Horse did Aliens or something like that, we were fourth, right?
I remember that, yes.
So we had about a 15% market share at the time, roughly. And if DC had purchased Malibu, that would have propelled the market share higher than Marvel. Marvel had just gone public, and so if you look at what I forget the guy's name, but if you look what their CEO was doing, he was buying up properties.
Perlman,
yeah.
Perlman.
Okay,
and so he was going around buying up properties in an effort to say, look, what I'm doing, I'm growing the company. We're now public. I'm growing it. Blah blah blah. Well, when everything crashed, what's the first thing they do? When they fired the guy, brought in a new guy, and what does he do? He kills everything. He killed Panini stickers, he killed Heroes World, and he killed Malibu Comics. It was simply corporate maneuvering. They just tried to. Marvel bought us simply to keep us out of the hands of DC. The coloring department, as much as we would like to think it had something to do with it, had nothing to do with it.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know.
That's a cool story.
It's a sadder story, actually.
It is sadder. It really is.
Yeah,
because it's just corporate maneuvering. They just didn't want DC to have
it. Certainly makes sense, though, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does. It does. Does anyone have any more questions for Steve? Some of our latecomers, Haley or Brent?
I got one. I'm not sure he wants to go into because it's a long-winded question. And, we try to be super positive on here, but I don't want you to, if it's going to take you in that direction, don't go. So,
bye.
Wow.
So I've told you multiple times when you and I first started working together, I've always been a huge fan of your work and of the Defenders, the Avengers, that period of time. Big fan of that stuff. I love those stories. I love what was going on there. I like a lot of what Marvel did in that, not just you, but a lot of what Marvel did in that era. Shortly after that, Shooter comes in and explodes the DC. I'm sorry, the Marvel universe exploded in the sense of sales and popularity. I am a fan of what I hear of what Shooter talks about as far as stories go. His did you ever see his blog, Steve?
No.
Jim Shooter's got a blog that he did. He hasn't done it in years, but he did several episodes. But he talks about, his ideas of what makes a good story, how to do continued story, how to do these kinds of things. He even goes into some of the New 52 and talks about why these particular issues are bad. So
because you don't need a lot of experience to.
no, but
zing, zing, zing.
So you were there though when you went from the kind of the revolving door of editors in chiefs to Shooter, right?
Right.
So I guess my question is kind of like, what kind of changes did you see as far as from a writer's perspective from story, right? I'm looking at what was the focus on story from pre-Shooter to Shooter?
Well, Shooter, I don't know that the stories. Well, okay. Let's see what I can come up with here. Shooter had rules. Shooter had, in his mind, he had figured out how things should be done, and so you had to play by his rules theoretically. When I came back, I had enough clout, and getting me back was a thing and all that, that he didn't really lean into them with me, but he had rules like no sound effects, because in real life, you don't see letters flying through the sky. His thing was always in real life, right? I mean, he came up with that whole Universe 2 or whatever it was called.
Like comics are real life.
Yeah, it has to be like real life.
I didn't know the sound effect.
And that's the kind of thing that I didn't really agree with, Yeah. But he had another rule, which is that you can't say the word supervillain, because in real life nobody talks about supervillains. And I said to him, yeah, but in the Marvel universe, they would distinguish between a guy who knocked off the corner liquor store and Dr. Doom. They would create a word. They would create a word for these big ticket guys.
Absolutely, yeah.
And when I explained that to him, he goes,
serial killer. Yeah.
Okay. And so he lost that rule. He gave up on that rule because I was able. So that's how I approach Shooter. It's like he was not the editor that I was talking about earlier, who would let you do anything, right? I mean, Shooter, but he let me do basically what I wanted to do. But every once in a while, he would come around and he would go, eh. And the other thing about Shooter was that he did tend to turn on people. He'd get, he'd decide somebody was his enemy and really go after him. I had heard that before I went back. I saw it happen while I was there. It never happened to me. But Ralph Macchio, who is a weasel.
Okay.
Shots fired.
But Macchio told me later, Shooter was just about to come for you. Shooter was working his way up, and he was just about to come for you when you left the next time, right?
Wow.
So it could be that I just dodged a bullet there. And then later I worked for him at Valiant.
Right.
And once again ran into his rules. One of his rules that he will tell you how he taught Frank Miller to draw is that all panels should be shot from a mid-distance. You don't want close-ups and you don't want far-away things. You want the mid-distance, because that's how television works. And so that's, how comics are supposed to work.
There's close-ups in TV.
And but I mean, he would do stuff like that, and you would go, but Jim, he was, he was pretty adamant in regards to a lot of those things.
Yeah,
I remember Mike Zeck saying he would rip him a new one on Secret Wars.
Yeah,
he would send art in, and he'd make him redo whole sections of the book.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it just drove him nuts.
Was he trying to craft a particular style that would be known to him?
Sorry,
was he making a certain style that everyone would recognize as his?
I don't think so, because the art did look different depending on who was drawing it. But I mean, that was just one of his overall rules.
He had certain storytelling rules that
Right.
he wanted to see done.
Right. You know,
and he if you didn't use them, he made you redo it. So you did use them. Is what I heard. So
well, yeah, and this is a little addendum here, but I did work for him at Valiant, and I was going to do a book called Shadow Man.
Yeah.
And he said he got 4 pages into XO Man of War and said, I don't have time to write this, but would you write it for me sounding like me? Because I believe, like Stan, that all books should sound the same too, right? But if you do this for me, when you write your book, you can write it the way you want to write it. And so I wrote 4 issues, whatever, of XO, and then came Shadow Man, and I wrote the first issue. And he came to me and he said, I know what I told you, but I can't do it. He said, I can't have a book that sounds this different from everything else. And you can tell people that, you know, he says, I promised you something and I'm having to go back on it because I firmly believe that that's what I have to do. But, you know, go ahead and tell people. And so over the next 20 years or whatever, it came up half a dozen times. And I would say, yeah, Shooter was a stand-up guy about the whole thing. I mean, he had these weird rules and he did this, and he did that. And then, like about, I don't know, early 2000s, somebody showed me probably his blog where he said, Englehart was always insubordinate, and that's why I had to get rid of him. And I thought, God damn it, Jim. I've been telling everybody what a nice guy you were this whole time.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And now you don't want to take, you know, you don't want to hear that story anymore, I guess, or whatever. So Shooter was complicated, and I didn't super enjoy working for him, but it wasn't like the worst thing in the world either, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, because you knew him by that time. I mean, that kind of nothing that I just said came as like a complete surprise,
right?
You know, so, but I don't. Roland, you said you agreed with him on a lot of his things, and I don't know, but I mean, I don't know which ones you agree on, but I still think, you know, I would say editors are there to like facilitate and so forth, but not to put up fences and say you can't go there, because your people are not going to be able to like go where they need to go, you know.
Well,
I mean,
certainly Silverline does not need to. They don't all need to sound alike. That's
They don't.
No,
They
and they don't.
don't.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah,
Or look alike.
Yeah, they don't look
I
alike.
can-
They don't sound alike. That's not what we want to do.
I can also vouch for the fact that Roland is much more Roy Thomas than Jim Shooter.
Yeah.
As far
Okay.
as, I mean, even when Roland has a suggestion, you know, and I typically ignore it, but no, I listen to Roland. But he's very, very fair, and when he has a point, you know, he has a point, and he's easy to work with. So,
well, I'm just
you know.
saying. I hope, you know. I'm glad. Good, because if a guy's got limits on what you can do,
right?
You know, I mean, there may be a reason here or there on this particular thing why you have to do this, that, or the other thing, but I think everybody should roam as free as they possibly can. You know,
You've never had any editorial input on
Free-range
Divinity.
comics.
I've had a little, yeah.
Barb, because your stories are so good. There's a comment there, Roland. Dean.
Which one here?
They met Roland at Three Rivers, which was just last week, which was a blast.
Ooh.
Rory and Roland and I were there in Pittsburgh. They finished Trumps. Did you see that one?
Oh yeah! What's up, Tacoma?
And I just wanted to let you know I thought it was great. So
it was a blast.
Thank you so much, Sagoma.
Thank you, Sagoma.
We had Rory and I had a comment too about our comic, so it was cool. It's fun. It was fun. It was a great weekend.
Very nice. It was a lot of fun.
I'm going to probably wrap this up pretty soon, if that's okay.
Oh yeah,
we usually end at on the half hour. So
we end up at 8:30 anyway. We want to give our heartfelt appreciation for you spending time with us tonight, Steve. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
It was
Steve.
a pleasure.
Yes.
As always, brought back a lot of
Loved it.
memories. Let's give Steve a hand.
Great hearing
everybody.
your
Round
voice
of
again.
applause.
Thank you, Steve.
Steve, everybody.
Thank you.
And as we close out, we always like to close out the same way before we roll the closing bumper, and we like to say something along the lines of,
Make
mine
Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.